Okay, next up we have Mesoblast, trading under the ASX code MSB with a market cap around 345 million. They are a world leader in developing allogeneic cellular medicines for the treatment of severe and life-threatening inflammatory conditions. The company has leveraged its proprietary mesenchymal lineage cell therapy technology platform to establish a broad portfolio of late-stage product candidates which respond to severe inflammation by releasing anti-inflammatory factors that counter and modulate multiple effector arms of the immune system, resulting in significant reduction of damaging inflammatory process. Joining us today is Mesoblast CEO, Silviu Itescu. Welcome, Silviu, and over to you. And I hope I got those words right.
Thank you very much. Some complex words. If we could go to the first slide, please. Next slide. Okay. This busy slide really encompasses the investment highlights in the company. We're developing a novel allogeneic, meaning off-the-shelf cell therapy products, which are based on a particular type of cell called a mesenchymal stromal cell that enables treatments to be developed without the need for donor matching or without any kind of immunosuppression, essentially off-the-shelf products. We have two platforms. One is called remestemcel, which is our lead platform, and the second is called rexlemestrocel, which is the next generation using monoclonal antibodies to isolate very, very pure populations of cells. The remestemcel platform is a more advanced. It's completed certain phase 3 trials and is in phase 3 in addition for patients with the adult version of steroid refractory acute graft-versus-host disease. But the pediatric program has completed phase 3. It demonstrated in a devastating disease after bone marrow transplantation that we met the primary endpoint, and we see a more than 4-year long-term survival benefit where at least 50% of the children are cured of this devastating disease, whereas very few children are alive more than 2 years using existing standard of care. We have met with the FDA several times, and we've been delayed in terms of approval. We have a meeting with the FDA coming up towards the latter part of this month, where we're providing to the FDA data from a new second potency assay that was in place during the phase 3, but that data have previously not been shown to the FDA, and we're looking forward to sharing those data with the FDA, and we'll be updating the market after this upcoming meeting. The product for the adult indication, which is a market size 5 times larger than pediatric, we're collaborating in a phase 3 program with the lead centers in the US that do these bone marrow transplants that account for about 80% of bone marrow transplants. They will be conducting a pivotal trial in adults with the same devastating disease in adults who have no alternative therapies. With respect to the second generation platform, rexlemestrocel, we've completed the first phase 3 trial for heart failure in patients with reduced ejection fraction, which accounts for about 50% of the heart failure market. We have what's called a Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation, an RMAT, for end-stage patients with the most severe complication who are being kept alive with a device called an LVAD. And in these patients, we've shown that we improve survival and improve outcomes. And we've had a meeting with the FDA as recently as around 2 weeks ago to talk about potential pathway for an approval in the sickest of the sick patients with these devices in place. We'll be able to update the market in the coming weeks when we get the formal minutes from that FDA meeting. Even more exciting is a study that was just published with our collaborators out of Boston on a randomized controlled trial in children with congenital heart disease, where a single injection of our cells into the heart at the time of a surgical operation to fix the heart resulted 12 months later in a doubling of the size of that left ventricle. So we were able to to substantially increase the size of the left ventricle, and that allowed the children to get a life-saving procedure that we think is going to give them a long-term lifespan that is relatively normal. And we're very excited about this indication. We've got an orphan drug designation from the FDA, and we've got a pediatric rare disease voucher for this indication, and we expect to go back to the FDA in sometime in the next quarter to talk about what an approval pathway in this pediatric population might look like. Finally, the same second-generation platform, rexlemestrocel, being developed for back pain, inflammatory back pain, and a first phase 3 trial has already completed. We have an RMAT also for this indication from the FDA, an agreement with the FDA of what a second phase 3 trial needs to achieve to get to an approval for this indication. That second trial is underway. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the mechanism of action of these cells, and it's my only scientific slide. The mesenchymal stromal cell in purple in the middle has a bunch of receptors that bind inflammatory cytokines, and you all know the term cytokine storm. So when these cells are in the middle of a cytokine storm, whether it's in the lungs or the heart or the gut in GVHD or inflammatory bowel disease, they encounter a multitude of inflammatory cytokines, IL-1, IL-6, IL-17, TNF, interferon gamma. They all bind these cells, activate the cells. The cells then secrete counter-inflammatory molecules that orchestrate an anti-inflammatory cascade, turning off the bad players that mediate the cytokine storm and that cause the destruction to the disease that we're trying to target. And that's the common mechanism of action of all of our products that target those diseases that I've just talked to you about. Next slide, please. So this is the pipeline. Well, I mentioned to you that our pediatric product is already in front of the FDA. For adults, it's beginning of phase 3. For heart failure, we've done one phase 3. We're going to do a second one, but we're also in the midst of discussions around accelerated approval pathways for both the sickest adults as well as children. And for back pain, we've commenced a second phase 3 trial. Next slide. For GVHD, the market opportunity, 30,000 people across various jurisdictions get an off-the-shelf allogeneic transplant. About 25% of those patients get the most severe form of GVHD, steroid refractory GVHD. So we in the US alone, of the 10,000 transplants, about 1,500 children get transplanted, and we're targeting about 500 of those children with steroid refractory GVHD, and 5 times as many adults. Next slide, please. For children, as I mentioned, we've got an upcoming meeting in March. We look forward to this meeting where we'll be presenting data from a second assay that the FDA has asked for, and it demonstrates that the product that we call Ryoncil, made with the current manufacturing process, which the FDA has inspected, demonstrates far greater potency than an earlier generation product, which provides the context to the potency assays and what they mean. Next slide, please. For adults, as I've said, those who've failed existing therapy, and there's only one that's approved, the mortality, the survival rather, is 20 to 30% by 100 days. A very, very dismal outcome. In these adults, our pilot data shows that we have a 67% survival through 100 days, which is remarkable. Those data have been provided to the FDA, and we're coming to them with the adult trial that is being developed by the BMT CTN. As I've mentioned, they will be conducting this trial. They control 80% of all transplants across the US, and they will fund the vast majority of this trial. So it will not cost Mesoblast much more than the manufactured product that we have to provide. Next slide, please. With respect to the heart failure program, this is a snapshot of the unmet need, the data, the mechanism targeting inflammation, and our discussions with the FDA. Suffice to say that it's a devastating complication. It's the #1 cause of mortality in the Western world. And 5 years after diagnosis, 50% of patients are dead. We've shown a 50% plus reduction in major outcomes of mortality, heart attacks, and strokes in a study in our phase 3 trial that recruited over 500 patients. Those form the data of form the basis of the discussion that we just had with the FDA, where that trial plus our previous LVAD trial represent 2 confirmatory studies of an endpoint that reduces mortality in the sickest of the sick patients. Next slide, please. And I think, as I've said to you, the end stage patients have an RMAT designation for the LVAD population, which demonstrated that we could reduce mortality in the high-risk patients by 82% over a 12-month period. That's the data that were presented to the FDA. Next slide, please. Finally, the pediatric study that I just mentioned earlier, recently published in December in the main cardiothoracic journal, not only did it demonstrate a doubling of the size of the left ventricle in children who got a little shot of our cells into the left ventricle at an 18 month of age, roughly, but more importantly, almost doubled the number of children who could undergo a definitive procedure where they have a normal left ventricle and a normal right ventricle, which is really the objective of trying to treat these very, very sick children with congenital heart disease. Next slide, please. And I think I've got one more slide or 2 more slides, which is in patients with severe back pain, a multi-billion-dollar market opportunity, 7 million patients a year in the US alone, about the same number across Europe, suffer from inflammatory back pain. It's the #1 cause for opioid prescriptions, and we all know about the opioid epidemic. This is what we're trying to fix with a simple injection straight into the disc. Next slide, please. And again, the snapshot here of the program, we had a first phase 3 trial that demonstrated over 3 years of significant reduction in pain following 1 injection. We've met with the FDA. We've got regulatory RMAT designation and agreement with the FDA that a second trial that meets that same endpoint that we met in trial #1 would result in approval. Next slide, please. This is the milestone snapshot that we're going to continue to update the market on every quarter. We provided an update in our AGM in December, and I think it's safe to say that we've been extremely busy in the last quarter, and so we achieved all of our targets for each of our 3 major programs, and highlighted here are the upcoming milestones in the next 1 to 2 quarters, some very significant milestones, both with the FDA as well as clinical outcomes. And needless to say, we continue to have some significant discussions with partners, because I think both the cardiac and the back pain assets will require substantial commercial partnership with the likes of the major cardiac and inflammatory pain companies that have substantial sales forces, which we will not be investing in, but we will leverage. In Europe, for example, we have a partnership on our back pain program with Grunenthal, Europe's #1 pain company, where on successful outcomes of the current trial, we stand to gain as much as I think 90 to 100 million in immediate payments, and they will take on sales, marketing, and distribution for us. I think that might be my last slide.
Thanks, Silviu. Great presentation. As a long-term sufferer of back pain, I should be watching with bated breath how that progresses. Now, I've got some questions here. With regards to the Ryoncil, why did the FDA request additional data from a second potency assay? And was the additional data in line with the original potency assay?
Yeah, look, it's the first product of its kind, first in class. And we've suffered a couple of years of delays and ongoing requests for more data by the FDA. Even though we were successful, and even though we had an advisory committee meeting that voted 9-1, advising the FDA to approve the product. FDA wants a bit more clarity and a bit more certainty that every vial that will go into the market to treat children and adults is identical and meets stringent potency requirements. So this second potency assay, I think, addresses FDA's concerns and is yet very much in line with the first assay, and in fact was in place even in the phase 3 trial. So we actually had more than one assay in place. We've just reanalyzed the data in a more, I would say, more robust way, and we've provided all the data to the FDA, and we think it more than meets their criteria. But I think you need to appreciate that the product, even when it's approved for children, will be available for hospitals and users for much wider use. And I think the FDA wants to be certain that when they release this product on the market, its widespread use will come with potency assays and disclaimers that allow it to be used safely. Yep.
Yeah, I totally understand. And how important is the ongoing development of Revascor? Is the rare pediatric and orphan drug designation from the FDA?
Well, look, that's a good question. Pediatric rare disease vouchers can be monetized. So on approval, the fact that we've got orphan drug designation, the fact that this is a highly unmet need in a high risk population, means that we think we can get to approval in a relatively shorter period of time. On approval, having a pediatric rare disease voucher, that's a monetizing asset that pharmaceutical companies pay somewhere around $100 million for, because it gives potential use for other drugs that have blockbuster status, where if you can reduce the time to approval using such a voucher for another drug, for a pharma company that's got a blockbuster drug, that can mean $1 billion to $2 billion in sales. So that we see that as a very valuable asset that we could on-sell.
Silviu, absolute pleasure to have you on. I'll be certainly watching the progress of the back pain treatment, but thanks for your time today.
Thank you.